All right. Let's get into some of our videos here. So this one right here is pretty interesting. This one is it talks about how the South became insanely religious, and this one kind of lays out the entire kind of Christian framework of America. So
this is a map showing the percentage of adults who are highly religious per state. Looking at it, you'll notice this southern region over here is much more distinct than the rest. In fact, it's so distinct, it even has its own name, the Bible Belt. Protestant Christianity plays a strong role in society here, and church attendance across the denominations is much higher than the nation's average. But why is that? Why is this part of America so much more religious than the rest? I mean, New England was literally founded by Puritans who thought Europe was too godless, and is now the most atheistic region in the Union. So what's happened? So at this point in time, there was basically a religious divide between Puritanism in the north and the Anglicans in the south. This was reflected in their living too, with the Puritans establishing a society deeply rooted in their faith, with strict moral codes and a focus on community worship. The Puritans' influence was so profound that it permeated nearly every aspect of life in New England, from governance to daily routines. Meanwhile, in the South, and it's not to say they weren't religious at all, because they certainly were, but their motivation for the settlement was largely economic from the start, focused on agriculture, trade, and that sort of stuff. The establishment of the Anglican Church in these colonies was part of replicating English societal structures and maintaining loyalty to the crown. There were also a mix of other denominations among settlers too, meaning that there was no one central religious identity that held all the power. So as a result, the societal structure in southern states like Virginia were more hierarchical and less centered around religion compared to the Puritan North. You see, while the original Puritan settlers were this very religious bunch, as time passed, the second and third generations of settlers, who were born in the New World, didn't always share the same intensity of religious conviction or the sense of urgency that drove their ancestors. Some even started to become disinterested in it for all the adherence it required. And as the colony began to develop more, economic prosperity started to take precedence over religious matters for many people. The once religiously unified society also started to see a migration of people with different backgrounds and beliefs over time, diluting the Puritan influence and their ability to enforce religious conformity. It was these things that led to the rise of secularism in New England. Now, you may be thinking, wouldn't the South be affected by these things too? And you'd be right, it did. But ironically, being less religiously intense actually helped preserve Christianity there. Agricultural focus created a much different economic trajectory compared to the North's industrialization, with theirs starting much later, particularly after the Civil War. Obviously, the impact on religion of this was also key. The more rural and agricultural nature of much of the South for a longer period helped maintain a traditional, community-centered way of life, where the church played a significant role, whereas the industrialization, and hence urbanization of the North, led to the growth of public education, which often led to increased exposure to diverse viewpoints and a greater emphasis on secularism. The colonies were still deeply religiously divided at this point too, with the Puritans in the North, the Anglicans in the South, and the middle colonies basically a mix of everything, from Quakers to Lutherans to Baptists to Presbyterians, and a few other denominations too. This all set the stage for the First Great Awakening, starting from 1730 to 1755. Though some place the beginning of it as early as 1720 and even the end of it as 1770. In response to these trends, ministers influenced by New England Puritanism, Scots-Irish Presbyterianism, and European Pietism began calling for a revival of religion and piety. The blending of these three traditions would produce an evangelical Protestantism that placed greater importance on, quote, seasons of revival or outpourings of the Holy Spirit, and on converted sinners experiencing God's love personally. This movement, sweeping across the colonies, marks a stark departure from the more reserved religious practices of the past, and it was brought to the forefront by passionate preachers like George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards. George Whitefield, an English minister, traversed the colonies, captivating immense crowds with his powerful and emotional sermons. He had a unique ability to connect with his audience on a deeply personal level, often moving them to tears or spiritual awakening. Similarly, Jonathan Edwards, preacher from New England, made a long-lasting, influential impact with his sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, emphasizing God's wrath upon believers after death to a very real, horrific, and fiery hell. Edwards' methods of preaching was characterized by vivid imagery and a passionate delivery that appealed directly to the emotions and fears of his listeners. This period of revivalism, driven by such charismatic preaching, was not just about religious teachings. It was an emotional experience that deeply resonated with the masses. Many sources from this time report people falling into trances, being struck down to the ground, or crying uncontrollably. And even though this was at the time during slavery and extreme racism, these preachers made sure to preach to anyone who would listen, breaking the traditional barriers of class and race in religious practice, and of course, spreading their religion widely. However, this shift towards emotive spirituality was controversial, leading to significant divisions within the religious communities. The awakening gave rise to two distinct groups, the Old Lights and the New Lights. And yes, this all relates to the modern-day divide. But basically, the Old Lights, made up of the Puritans, Baptists, and Presbyterians, rejected the revival movement, saying it wasn't true religion, but but rather just a theatrical experience, meaning the New Lights embraced this revivalist movement. They viewed the emotional experiences and passionate preaching as genuine manifestations of divine power and a necessary revival of true Christian faith. As you might have guessed by now, in the north, the Old Light was strong enough to largely maintain their hold. Meanwhile, in the south, the New Light, aka evangelicism, took off like wildfire. The Baptist and Methodist churches became dominant here. In these churches, there was less reliance on religious authority all the way through. While the Old Light churches thought that extensive education was necessary to interpret the Bible correctly, the New Light ones were more inclined to say that its meaning could be understood by anyone. If you were a farmer back then and felt called to preach and could gather a congregation, then you're already a minister. So there were a lot more Baptist preachers than any other denomination. And the South at this time was very rural, so this idea appealed strongly to people who might not have regular access to a church. This, combined with the inclusive message of offering salvation to all regardless of social status and race, resonated deeply in the hierarchical society of the South. But the thing is, just like how Christianity has been on decline in the North for a long time, now it's in the entire US as a whole. And yes, that includes the Bible Belt. Christianity, the largest religion in the United States, experienced a 20th century high of 91% of the total population in 1976. This declined to 73.7% by 2016 and 64% in 2022. Ironically, the Southern Baptist churches, which, if you remember, weren't popular in the North, are declining in every region besides New England. That's right. It is literally the only region in the US where South Baptist churches.
I thought that was the most fascinating things about this video, much I was already aware of, but I did not know that Southern Baptist church is growing in the New England area, which kind of brings the conversation back full circle, because what we've been talking about is the English Puritans landing in Plymouth, their effect, their theology, the Reformed Calvinist theology, and how that was unique and how it had influenced their civic responsibilities, how that then gets morphed with some of the other Protestant denominations and what becomes the Episcopalian Church, Methodist, Baptist, and now we come back full circle, as I argued earlier about the Puritanism is the skeletal bones of modern day evangelical Christianity. We come back to where evangelical Southern Baptist Christianity is only growing in the New England area. What are the chances of that?
Grew. Overall, Christianity has been in decline in the US for a number of reasons, with some of them actually mirroring the same reasons that ended the Great Awakenings, such as.
And this last ending, what he's getting ready to do is basically say that Christianity is eventually going to be a minority faith in the United States because of the rise of the nuns, the people who, on a religious survey, when the Pew Research Center sends out, "Are you religious?" and it says, Christian, or it says Protestant Christian, Catholic, Muslim, Buddhist, Jewish, Hindu, these types of things. And then at the end, it'll say none of the above, which includes atheists, agnostics, and spiritual but not religious. And I think it was 2018 that nun demographic was the biggest of each demographic, especially amongst younger people. So he's going to make the argument that Christianity is going to go away. And I would argue this is why I feel like he's probably left of center, because anybody who's kind of has their finger on the pulse of culture and what's going on online is Christianity is not going to go away. And in fact, more traditional forms, i.e. Orthodoxy and Catholicism, are going to grow stronger and stronger in America. And it's tied with the movement towards conservative Christian values, because people are looking for something that's non-changing. And if you got anything from the video that we just watched, is that Christianity in America is constantly changing, always revising, always reforming, always moving into new presentations, new theology, accommodating various belief systems. And so I feel like that is the kind of archetype and the tone and tenor of Protestant Christianity in America. And so where he thinks Christianity is going to go away, I think Protestantism is going to go away, but Christianity is not going to go away. That's my personal opinion, but you're about to hear his case for why he thinks nuns are going to be the majority.
A rise of rationalism and science, but also because of new factors like America becoming more multicultural and religion starting to get mixed more intensely with politics, which has disillusioned many people, especially the younger generations. An increasing number of Americans now identify as religiously unaffiliated, often referred to as nuns. And no, not those nuns. This group includes atheists, agnostics, and those who describe their religion as nothing in particular. The rise of the nuns reflects a broader trend of disengagement from organized religion. So I guess the question is, with America's Christian population set to dip below 50% by 2070, making it no longer the majority religion for the first time ever in the country's short history, is there anything they can do to stop this? It's not just a North or South problem, but a countrywide one. Or dare I say, is it even a problem at all? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a major problem. Major problem. Just want to note that RIP said, my aunt tried to tell me we were related to Jonathan Edwards. Turns out we weren't, but I do have an ancestor who lived on the East Coast around the same time with the same name. That's funny. So thanks, RIP, for letting us know a little bit about your family lore. Okay, so the other one, now we're going to move to a totally different framework where we're going to focus on the historical context. What I was trying to lay out in the beginning, and it doesn't hit everything that I was kind of promoting because I see it, through my own lens, my own biases. But this was the best one I could find and the most engaging video. And this is a video that's going to give you a historical context for our conversation today and everything that I was laying out. So check it out.
Austerity and spiritual purity. The Puritans were all this and more. One might go as far as to call them religious zealots. Zealot here is not a derogatory term, but a grounded depiction of their way of life. The Puritans believed very strongly in their religious sensibilities and were willing to do just about anything to see them be carried out. As was often the case with new religious movements, the title of Puritan came from the opponents of this religious movement, who ridiculed them as being unrealistic purists. Those labeled with this title took up the challenge, declaring that they were indeed Puritans, just as their adversaries had claimed. The Puritans were successors of the Protestant Reformation that shook the Catholic Church to its core. The Reformation was sparked when a Catholic monk named Martin Luther began questioning the official teachings and narratives of the Church. On October 31st, 1517, he nailed his 95 theses to the doors of an abbey called All Saints' Church, also known as Castle Church. Luther ignited a dialogue that led to a new movement among Christians, and soon, new denominations began to spring up. Before the Reformation, the Catholic Church, whose very name Catholic is the Latin derivative of a Greek word meaning universal, had positioned itself as the universal church in the land. After the Reformation, several denominations in Europe competed to gain faithful converts. Martin Luther became a primary leader of the Reformation, but he was not the only one. Close on the heels of Martin Luther's rise to prominence was a man named John Calvin. John Calvin is crucial to the history of the Puritans, as it was upon his subsequent doctrine of Calvinism that many Puritan beliefs and thoughts would be based. John Calvin was a French reformer who, after fleeing his native France, set up shop in Switzerland, where he preached his beliefs on predestination. Like Luther before him, Calvin stressed the need for faith for Christians to achieve salvation. And also, like Luther, he believed that salvation was not something someone could earn through good works. Rather, it was something one could only achieve through faith in God. He preached that man is truly humble who neither claims any personal merit in the sight of God, nor proudly despises his brethren, or aims at being thought superior to them, but reckons it enough that he is one of the members of Christ, and desires nothing more than that the head alone should be exalted. He believed that whether we come to faith in God or go astray and turn our backs on grace and faith, all of it had been predetermined in advance. This viewpoint would become an important fixture in the life of the Puritans. In medieval Europe, religion and politics often went hand in hand. Persecution of minorities, whether ethnic or religious, was quite common. In the beginning, the Puritans were religious reformers who sought to separate English Protestants from the last vestiges of Roman Catholic tradition. The Puritans were against the Catholic Church and sought to purify the Catholic teachings. The founders of Puritanism did not intend to start a new religious movement. They simply wanted to cleanse the Protestant Church of England of underlying vestiges of the Catholic Church. One of these early reformers was Thomas Cranmer, an Archbishop of the Church of England. With the progress of these reformers, the Puritans would become even more puritanical, soon rejecting just about all other Protestant faiths that differed from their teachings. Protestant gains were overruled in the era of Mary I, who is also remembered as Bloody Mary. Before long, it was a crime to engage in any religious practice outside of Catholicism. Queen Mary I angered England's Protestants even further when she married the Catholic stalwart Philip, the King of Spain, in 1554. Close on the heels of this marriage was the announcement that Catholicism in England would be officially restored. Then, in 1555, Mary went a step further by putting Catholic laws regarding heresy back in place. This renewed push against heresy would cost Protestant reformers, such as Cranmer, their lives. This persecution forced many Protestants to flee to Switzerland. After the death of Mary in 1558, a dichotomy emerged among the following British monarchs. They realized that the best way to deal with the religious disparity was to walk the fine line between Catholicism and Protestantism, without leaning much towards either. The Puritan Protestants wished to eliminate this tradition, since it seemed to harken back to Catholicism. Considering the Protestant reforms in some other parts of Europe, the Puritans were ashamed of the slow pace of the Reformation within the Church of England. The Puritans in the Church of England began separating and creating their own religious movement. King James was a Calvinist, but a Reformed Calvinist movement called Arminianism started to find its footing in England. To tackle the so-called Arminianism controversy emerging in Protestant circles, the great minds of Calvinism came together in the Netherlands in 1618. King James I sent his representatives to the conference to argue for the complete rejection of Arminianism. Such efforts pleased the Puritans. These positive developments were enough to keep the more vocal voices of the Puritans down, and many were content just to engage in what they called practical divinity. But soon after, in 1619, some Puritans felt it expedient to circumvent the will of their king when he decided against backing his son-in-law, Frederick, the new king of Bohemia, in his struggle against Catholic forces during the 30 Years' War. However, besides some clandestine efforts such as these, most Puritans were willing to tolerate King James as long as he in turn tolerated the main tenets of Calvinism. In 1622, King James issued a command to safeguard the public from religious confusion. Only those who held a Bachelor of Divinity or higher would be permitted to teach predestination, further upsetting the Puritans. Many Puritans sensed further trouble ahead when King James allowed his son Charles to wed a French Catholic princess. And when Charles I came to the throne in 1625 and began practicing Catholicism openly, they felt that their worst fears had been confirmed. The arrival of King Charles led many Puritans to seek a new place to plant their faith, the Americas. The Pilgrims and others came to America on the Mayflower, making their home in Plymouth in 1620. But many are unaware of just how much religious piety drove these settlers to leave their old world for a completely new one. It was not in search of gold or land that the Pilgrims, who were separatists, although they shared many things in common with other Puritans, embarked on this dangerous voyage. They wanted religious freedom and a chance to build a society according to their ideals. Today, Plymouth is a city in Massachusetts, but initially it was a part of the general colony of New England before separating off into the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The Pilgrims, who settled in Plymouth, were led by William Bradford, among others. Before even stepping foot on land, the Pilgrims famously signed the Mayflower Compact, in which they dictated how the colony should be run and how their individual lives should be lived. This document would prove pivotal in shaping America. The philosopher John Locke, whose famed social contract later influenced the very creation of the Declaration of Independence, cited it. To say that the words of the Mayflower Compact were influential would be an understatement. Further waves of Puritan migration were in the works, and by 1630, a Puritan leader named John Winthrop was leading the so-called Great Migration of a large Puritan flock to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The Church of England was far too oppressive and retroactive for English Protestants, who wished to reform how their religious services were carried out. Even though the English had broken with the Catholic Church, in many ways, it seemed that England was Protestant in name only. With all the trappings of the Catholic Church intact, it was foolish to pretend otherwise. Only when the situation was no longer tolerable in England did the Puritans begin to look toward the Americas as a permanent refuge for their flock. To learn more about why the Puritans left England, check out our book, The Puritans, a captivating guide to the English.
So that video gives you a good, again, that's basically much of what I presented in the opening monologue, but just for your own edification and comprehensive analysis for Jason's stream today, I thought we could certainly include that. And I'm going to share, we're not going to dive into Ryan Reeves. Those are long videos. They are worthy of consideration, though, and you should check them out. That one right there is on the First Great Awakening, and then this one is on the Second Great Awakening. So check those out if you are interested in the topic.